You'd think 10 years would be long enough for a wound to scar over. But some wounds don't heal. Not when they're reopened every birthday, every holiday, every time you see smiling family photos posted online with your name carefully erased from the story. For 10 years, my seat at the family table sat empty, and not because I couldn't be there. It was because I wasn't wanted. I can still picture it. Thanksgiving in North Carolina, Christmas in Boston, family reunions in Denver or Austin. All those familiar faces gathered together, laughing, drinking, posing for pictures. Cousins I hadn't seen since they were little, siblings who used to call me every week, even distant relatives who barely remember my name. Everyone was there, everyone except me. And the cruelest part? My own son made sure of it. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Surely there was some falling out, some argument, some betrayal that explained it all. That's the thing. I never got an explanation. Not once. It wasn't like we had a blow-up fight where words were said we couldn't take back. It wasn't like I betrayed him or he betrayed me. No, instead, it was silence. A cold, deliberate silence that stretched on for a decade. I'd call. He wouldn't pick up. I'd text. No reply. I'd ask if we could meet up. Sorry, busy. But then I'd scroll through Facebook and see pictures of him smiling at Disney World with the whole family in matching shirts. Pictures of holiday dinners where there was plenty of food, but no room for me. It felt like being erased while still alive. Like being written out of a story that I'd helped build from the very beginning. And the worst part of it all? For the longest time, I kept blaming myself. Maybe I wasn't a good enough mother. Maybe I worked too hard. Maybe I was too strict when he was younger. I replayed our entire relationship in my mind, combing through the years for the one mistake that could have caused such rejection. But no matter how far back I went, no matter how deeply I searched, I came up empty. There was no big betrayal. No unforgivable act. Just nothing. And so, after years of being shut out, I did the only thing I could do. I built a life without them. My business became my focus. Long nights turned into bigger clients. Bigger clients turned into success I never thought I'd have. And eventually, that success turned into something I'd only ever dreamed of, a mansion on the outskirts of Dallas, Texas. A sprawling home with tall white pillars and glass doors that opened to a backyard pool. The kind of house that little girl me, growing up in a cramped apartment in Detroit, would never have thought possible. It wasn't the family dinners I'd always wanted, but it was something. It was mine. And then, after 10 long years of silence, the unthinkable happened. One afternoon, I heard a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My friends usually texted before coming by, and deliveries always rang the bell. But this knock was different. Hesitant, uneven. The kind of knock that carries nerves with it. When I opened the door, my heart nearly stopped. Standing there, looking sheepish and uncomfortable on my marble doorstep, was my son. And right beside him, clutching his arm like she owned him, was my daughter-in-law. The same son who hadn't invited me to a single holiday in 10 years. The same daughter-in-law who'd smiled in countless photos surrounded by family, while my absence was never questioned. And now, suddenly, they were at my mansion door. For a moment, I froze. I didn't slam the door, didn't shout, didn't even let my jaw drop the way my body wanted to. Instead, I opened the door wider and simply said, well, this is a surprise. And just like that, I watched the colors drain from their faces. I'll be honest with you all. Writing and telling these stories takes me hours. Hours of digging through memories, organizing them into something that makes sense, and then recording so you can listen to them here. If you're still with me at this point, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It might not seem like much, but it truly makes a world of difference when you consider the time and heart that goes into each story. Now, you might be wondering, what did they say? Why show up now after all this time? That's the thing. At first, they didn't say much. My son looked at me like he wanted to explain, but his mouth just opened and closed without words. My daughter-in-law, though, she was different. She had that fake sweet smile plastered across her face, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind you wear when you want something. And that's when it hit me. They weren't here to apologize. They weren't here to make amends. No, they were here because they needed something. And that realization, that was the moment everything changed for me. I wasn't going to cry this time. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to crumble under the weight of their rejection. This time, I was going to play the game on my terms. And trust me, if you think 10 years of silence broke me, you're wrong. All it did was teach me patience. The kind of patience you need for a slow, calculated revenge. So I let them inside. I offered them coffee. I sat across from them in my sunlit living room, waiting for the story I already knew was coming. They thought I was the same woman they'd walked away from 10 years ago, but they had no idea who they were dealing with now. If you were in my shoes, if your own son and his wife showed up after a decade of silence, acting like nothing happened, would you let them in? Or would you slam the door in their faces? I'd love to know what you think in the comments. The air in my living room that afternoon felt thick, almost too heavy to breathe. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting streaks across the polished wood floors, but instead of warmth, all I felt was the chill of their presence. My son sat on the edge of the cream leather couch, his hands clasped together so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His wife, meanwhile, perched beside him, her posture stiff, chin tilted ever so slightly upward like she was sitting in judgment of me, even though she was the one trespassing in my home after a decade of silence. I took my time. I poured coffee into delicate porcelain cups, my good set, the one I usually save for guests who mattered. I stirred mine slowly, deliberately clinking the spoon against the side of the cup, making them wait. That was the thing about silence. For 10 years, they had weaponized it against me. Now, I had learned to use it too. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my son spoke. "Mom," he began, his voice cracked at the edges, like it hadn't been used for words with me in far too long. We wanted to talk. Things haven't been easy. I raised an eyebrow. Haven't been easy? My voice was calm, steady. No trace of the fury or heartbreak that bubbled beneath the surface. He shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, we've had some setbacks. Financial, mostly. The last few years, honestly, they've been rough. And there it was. Not an apology. Not even an acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just a smooth segue into the real reason they'd shown up on my doorstep. Money. His wife jumped in before I could reply. "We didn't want to come here like this, but, well, we know you're doing well. We've seen the house, the business, and, family should help each other out when times are tough." I almost laughed. Family should help each other out? That was rich. Coming from the woman who made sure I wasn't invited to a single Christmas dinner for 10 years. But I didn't laugh. Not yet. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, crossing one leg over the other, and asked, "So what exactly are you asking me?" My son looked at her, then back at me. His voice was small, almost ashamed. "We're at risk of losing the house. The mortgage, the bills, everything's stacked against us. We were hoping maybe you could help us out, just until we get back on our feet." I let the words hang in the air, savoring the weight of them. For so long, I had been the one left out, the one begging for scraps of acknowledgement, the one erased from their world. And now, suddenly, the roles were reversed. They needed me. But here's the thing. Revenge doesn't taste good when it's rushed. It has to be savored, carefully prepared, allowed to simmer until the flavor is just right. So I didn't refuse. I didn't throw them out. I didn't even call them out for their hypocrisy. No, I smiled. A calm, collected smile that I knew unnerved them both. "I see," I said softly. "And what made you think of me after all this time?" My son's eyes darted to the floor. His wife spoke instead. "Because you're family, and family doesn't turn their back when someone's in need." The irony of her words was almost too much to bear. I could feel laughter bubbling up in my chest like champagne fizz, but I swallowed it back down. "Family," I repeated, as if testing the word on my tongue. That's an interesting way to put it. I didn't give them an answer that day. Instead, I let them linger in my home a little longer, sipping coffee they didn't deserve, glancing nervously at the luxury that surrounded them. I let them stew in uncertainty, because uncertainty is the first ingredient in fear. Eventually, they left. They didn't press for an answer, though I could see the desperation etched in their faces. I promised to think about it and call them later. But of course, I had already decided. This wasn't going to be as simple as saying yes or no. This was going to be my chance to take back every piece of dignity, every ounce of respect they'd stolen from me. And if that meant drawing things out a little, making them sweat, then so be it. That night, I lay awake in my king-size bed, staring at the ornate chandelier above me. My mind spun in circles, replaying every missed birthday, every lonely holiday, every unanswered phone call. The years of being cast aside had shaped me into someone they no longer recognized, someone they didn't know how to handle. And I realized something. This wasn't just about money. This was about power. For 10 years, they had held it over me, deciding whether I was worthy of inclusion. Now the tables had turned. I held the power, and I wasn't about to give it up easily. So I started planning. Step 1, information. If they wanted my help, I needed to know everything. Every detail about their lives, their debts, their failures. I wasn't going to hand over a dime without peeling back every layer of the story. Step 2, appearances. I would play the part of the generous mother, the one they thought they could manipulate. I'd nod. I'd listen. I'd let them believe I was softening. Because the sweeter the bait, the deeper the hook sinks. Step 3, execution. That part one hadn't fully mapped out yet, but I knew it would come to me. Revenge has a way of writing itself when the time is right. 2 days later, they called. This time I answered. "Mom," my son said quickly, relief dripping from his voice as if he hadn't believed I'd pick up. "Thanks for hearing us out the other day. We know it was a lot to drop on you." I kept my tone even. "I've been thinking about it. Why don't you both come over again this weekend? We can go over the details." They agreed instantly, too eagerly. And when the call ended, I smiled to myself. Because here's the thing about revenge. The sweetest part isn't the act itself. It's the anticipation. Watching your enemy walk into the trap you've set, step by oblivious step, thinking they're getting what they want when really, you're leading them straight into their downfall. And that weekend, when they sat in my living room again, notebooks in hand, ready to convince me of their need, they had no idea that the real convincing had already begun. If you were sitting in my place, listening to the son who shut you out for a decade, now asking for your money, what would you do? Would you give in and help? Or would you see it as the chance to finally turn the tables? Because I'll be honest with you, at that moment, I realized I wasn't just going to deny them. I was going to make them regret ever thinking they could use me. And I had 10 years of pain to fuel my every move. When I was younger, I used to believe that revenge was about big gestures, slamming doors, shouting matches, dramatic walkouts. But 10 years of silence taught me something different. Real revenge isn't loud. It's quiet, patient, surgical. It's not about one explosive act. It's about a series of small, calculated steps that dismantle someone piece by piece until they're left exposed. And so, the weekend after my son and his wife came begging, I began step 1, information gathering. They thought I'd just sit back and take their story at face value. They thought I'd be the desperate, lonely mother so desperate for their presence that I'd throw money at them just to stay close. But here's the thing. I've built my entire career by asking questions, by digging where no one else bothers to dig. My business thrived because I never trusted the surface. And if I could peel back the lies of clients and competitors, I sure as hell could peel back the lies of my own son and his wife. So I hired someone, a private investigator. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why go that far? Why not just ask around or snoop online? But I wasn't interested in scraps. I wanted the whole picture. Financial records, business dealings, debts, even social circles. I wanted to know exactly who they'd become in the 10 years they'd shut me out. It didn't take long. Money talks, and in Dallas, money can talk louder than words. Within a week, I had a folder on my desk thick enough to choke a shredder. And what I found inside, that was the first time in years I felt truly vindicated. Because it wasn't just financial hardship they were hiding. No, it was something much darker. Turns out, my daughter-in-law had been living far beyond their means. Designer clothes from Neiman Marcus, expensive vacations, spa memberships, and Instagram-worthy dinners, all on credit cards, all while my son's job had been hanging by a thread. He had been laid off from his engineering position in Austin nearly a year ago, and instead of tightening the belt, she doubled down on the spending. Worse still, I discovered that they hadn't come to me because I was the first option. I was the last. They had borrowed money from her parents, maxed out loans from friends, and even dipped into shady payday lending schemes. They weren't asking me for help out of love or family loyalty. They were asking me because everyone else had already slammed the door in their faces. And that lit a fire in me. Because for 10 years, I had been the one left out. The one excluded. The one whose presence wasn't good enough for their little family gatherings. And now, suddenly, when the walls were caving in, I was supposed to swoop in and save them? No. Not without making them feel the weight of every lonely holiday. Every unanswered phone call. Every time I stared at family photos online and wondered what I had done wrong. When they arrived that weekend, I was ready. I greeted them warmly, even hugged my son at the door, though I could feel the stiffness in his body as he returned it. My daughter-in-law wore another one of her 4 smiles, the kind that stretched across her face like plastic. We sat at the dining table, and I spread out papers in front of us. They weren't the PI reports. I wasn't going to show my cards yet. Instead, they were blank sheets of paper, arranged neatly like I was ready to discuss numbers. So I said, folding my hands, "You mentioned needing help. I'd like to know exactly how much we're talking about." Their eyes lit up, like children on Christmas morning who just spotted the pile of gifts under the tree. "We're behind on the mortgage," my son started, glancing at his wife. "About 3 months now. And the bills, well, they're stacking up. Altogether, maybe 75,000 could get us back on track." 75,000. He said it so casually, like he was asking me to pick up the tab for dinner. I tilted my head, studying him. $75,000? That's a lot of money. He nodded quickly. "We'd pay you back, of course. With interest, if you want. Just we need a fresh start." And then she spoke. My daughter-in-law. The woman who had kept me at arm's length for a decade. "Look, we know it's a lot. But like I said before, family helps family. You have this beautiful home, this thriving business. It's not like you'll even miss it. It's just sitting in your account, isn't it?" The gall of her words nearly made me choke on my tea. Just sitting in my account. As if I hadn't bled for every dollar I earned. As if the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the decades of hard work were meaningless, because I wasn't the one they chose to spend holidays with. But I didn't let my anger show. I smiled. I nodded. I made notes on the blank paper as though I were taking their request seriously. "Of course," I murmured. "Family helps family." But inside, my mind was spinning. $75,000. They thought I'd hand it over without hesitation. They thought they could walk back into my life after 10 years and demand a piece of what I'd built. Well, if they wanted $75,000, I was going to make them earn every cent, not with work, but with humility. That night, after they left, I opened the PI's folder again. And there it was, a detail I hadn't paid enough attention to before. Their HOA had already sent multiple foreclosure warnings. If they didn't make a payment soon, they weren't just going to lose their house. They were going to lose it publicly. Their neighbors would know. Their friends would know. And that's when my plan began to take shape. I wasn't going to deny them outright. That would be too easy, too predictable. No, I was going to dangle the possibility of help in front of them, just out of reach, long enough to watch their pride crumble. Because revenge, I realized, wasn't just about saying no. It was about letting them feel the weight of the yes they'd never get. 2 weeks later, I invited them to dinner. This time, I reserved a private room at a steakhouse in downtown Dallas, one of those places where the cheapest cut of meat costs more than a week's groceries. When they walked in, underdressed and nervous, I smiled warmly and motioned for them to sit. I ordered wine. I ordered appetizers. I treated them like honored guests. And then, when the food arrived, I leaned forward and said, "I've been thinking about your request. I want to help. But before I commit to anything, I need full transparency. I need to see all your bills, all your statements, every single detail of what you owe." My son blinked, caught off guard. His wife's smile faltered. "That's a lot," she said slowly. I tilted my head. "Well, 75,000 is a lot too, isn't it?" And just like that, I saw it, the first crack in their armor. Back home that night, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, staring out at the Dallas skyline glittering in the distance. I could already feel it, the shift in power. For 10 years, they'd made me feel small, invisible, excluded. Now they were the ones squirming. Now they were the ones at my mercy. And I was only just getting started. I've always believed that desperation reveals who people truly are. It strips away the polished words, the rehearsed smiles, and the little pretenses that make us seem put together. Desperation is raw, unpolished. It makes even the most prideful person show their weakest self. And when I asked my son and his wife for full transparency, every bill, every statement, every detail of their financial lives, I knew I had planted the seed of desperation. The next few days were quiet, but I could feel the tension buzzing in the air like static. They didn't call, they didn't text, but I knew they were talking, arguing, panicking. Because here's the thing, people like my daughter-in-law, who thrive on appearances, don't want anyone peeling back the curtain. They want to project success, even while drowning. And now I had demanded they strip themselves bare, financially and emotionally. A week later, I got an email. The subject line was simple, documents you requested. Attached was a folder of PDFs, bank statements, overdue bills, mortgage letters, credit card statements, even loan notices. I printed them out, laid them across my kitchen island, and started reading. It was worse than I thought. They weren't just in debt. They were buried alive. Maxed out credit cards at Nordstrom and Saks. Thousands spent on vacations they couldn't afford. A lease for a luxury car they clearly didn't need. My son's unemployment checks had stopped months ago, and yet the spending never slowed. And then there was the mortgage. 3 months behind, just as he'd said. But what he hadn't told me was that foreclosure proceedings were already underway. If they didn't come up with the money within 60 days, the house would be gone. I sat there for hours, flipping through page after page. At first, I felt anger. Anger at the irresponsibility, anger at the lies, anger at how they thought they could waltz into my home after 10 years and expect me to clean up their mess. But then something else crept in, satisfaction. Because these papers, they weren't just bills. They were leverage. Proof that for all their pride, for all their efforts to erase me from their lives, they were crumbling. And now, I held the evidence in my hands. When they came over that weekend, I was ready. I didn't spread the papers out immediately. Instead, I let them sit in the living room, sipping the tea I'd prepared. My son looked tired, hollow. My daughter-in-law, though, kept her mask on. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her smile stretched so tight it looked painful. So, I said lightly, as if we were discussing the weather, I reviewed the documents you sent me. My son's eyes flicked up. His wife's smile wavered. And she asked, her tone falsely sweet. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. And I'm curious, how do you expect me to hand over $75,000 when I can see you've been spending on designer clothes and luxury cars while falling behind on your mortgage? My son flinched, but she jumped in immediately, her voice sharper now. That's not fair. You don't understand the pressure we've been under. Appearances matter, his job prospects, our standing in the community. I cut her off with a laugh. Not cruel, but sharp enough to slice through her excuses. Appearances matter? I repeated. Funny. For 10 years, appearances mattered more to you than family. You erased me from photos. You excluded me from holidays. All so you could present some perfect little picture to the world. And now you want me to save that picture. Her face flushed crimson. My son shifted uncomfortably beside her, opening his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. The silence stretched. For once, it was me who held the power in that silence. Finally, I leaned forward, tapping the stack of papers on the coffee table. If you want my help, things are going to change. No more lies. No more appearances. No more treating me like I don't exist. You'll come clean. You'll humble yourselves. Otherwise, you can walk out that door right now and never come back. My son stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped. His wife glared at me, her jaw tight, but she didn't argue. Not this time. And that was the first crack in her armor. After they left, I poured myself a glass of wine and thought about what had just happened. 10 years ago, if they had come to me with honesty, with humility, I would have given them the shirt off my back. I would have bent over backwards to save them, to protect them. But that version of me was gone. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about principle, about dignity, about making them understand the pain they had caused me all those years, not by yelling or crying, but by putting them in a position where they had no choice but to face the truth. And the truth was simple: they needed me. But I didn't need them. The next step was subtle but deliberate. I started asking questions, not just about their debts, but about their daily lives, where they went, who they saw, what they spent their time on. I'd ask with a smile, jotting notes in a little leather-bound notebook as though I were considering their case like a banker deciding on a loan. At first, they answered hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable. But the more desperate they became, the more they revealed. And little by little, I began piecing together not just their financial downfall, but their emotional one too. My son admitted he felt like a failure, unable to provide. My daughter-in-law confessed reluctantly that she couldn't stand the thought of losing face in front of her friends. Their marriage, though they tried to hide it, was strained, fraying at the edges. I didn't gloat. I didn't lecture. I just listened. But inside, every word they spoke felt like vindication. For 10 years, I had been the outsider. Now, I was the one holding their secrets, their shame, their vulnerabilities. And I wasn't finished yet. A few days later, I invited them to dinner again. This time at my mansion. I cooked a full spread: roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, fresh green beans, the works. When they arrived, I welcomed them warmly, even cheerfully, as though the tension of the last meeting had never happened. But when dessert was served, I placed a small envelope on the table. "What's this?" my son asked, hesitating before opening it. "Read it," I said softly. Inside was a check, but not for $75,000, for $5,000. "It's a start," I told them, "a gesture of goodwill. But before you get more, I need proof that you're making changes. Cancel the luxury car. Sell the designer clothes. Show me that you're willing to sacrifice before you expect me to sacrifice for you." My son looked relieved, almost grateful. But his wife, her face tightened, her lips pressed into a thin line. "5,000, she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "That doesn't even cover 1 month of our mortgage." I sipped my wine calmly. "Then I suggest you get creative." The silence that followed was delicious. That night, after they left with the check in hand, I stood at my front door, watching their car pull out of the driveway. I could almost feel the storm brewing inside their marriage, the cracks widening under the weight of my conditions. And for the first time in a long time, I slept soundly, because I knew this was only the beginning. When you strip away appearances, you see people for who they really are. And that's exactly what began to happen after I handed them that small check. Just $5,000 when they were expecting 75. My son had looked at me like I'd given him a lifeline. His wife, though, her face told a different story. Her lips tightened, her cheeks flushed, and I could almost hear the storm brewing inside her. $5,000 wasn't a lifeline to her. It was an insult, and that was exactly the point. I wasn't going to make this easy. If they wanted my help, they were going to have to prove they were worthy of it. For 10 years, they had made me feel like I didn't matter. Now, every condition I placed was a reminder that I held the power. The first week after that dinner, I didn't hear from them. No calls, no texts. I knew what that silence meant: arguments, heated, late-night battles behind closed doors. She probably accused him of being weak, of begging his mother for money. He probably defended me. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe he just sat in silence the way he always had, letting her steer the ship even as it sank. But then one evening my phone buzzed. A text from my son. We sold the car, putting the money toward the mortgage. I smiled at the screen. One condition met. A few days later, another message came. Dropped off some clothes at consignment. Not much, but it's a start. Another crack in the armor. And then, finally, a call. My son's voice was quieter this time, less strained. "Mom, I know it's not everything, but we're trying. Can we come over this weekend? We want to talk." Of course, I said yes. Not because I was eager to see them, but because I knew every visit was another opportunity to peel away their pride. When they arrived, I noticed the difference immediately. My son's suit looked older, a little worn at the edges. His wife was still dressed nicely, but not dripping in labels like before. She sat down stiffly in my living room, her smile brittle, her nails tapping against the armrest of the chair. "So," I said calmly, "you've made some progress?" "Yes," my son nodded. "We're cutting back, like you said. It hasn't been easy," but he glanced at his wife. "We're doing what we can." She said nothing. I let the silence stretch, savoring it. Then I pulled out another envelope. This time, inside was a check for $10,000. Her eyes lit up instantly, but I raised a hand before she could speak. "Before you get too excited, let's be clear," I said. "This isn't a gift. This is conditional. I want proof that you've canceled the spa memberships, proof that you're living within your means, and proof that you're being honest with me moving forward. If I catch even a whiff of deceit, this stops. Understood?" My son nodded quickly. His wife, she hesitated, then gave a tight smile. Understood. But I could see it in her eyes, the resentment. She hated that I was in control. She hated that every step forward came with a string attached. And that hatred? That was fuel. That night, as I sat alone in my kitchen with a cup of tea, I thought about how far things had shifted. For 10 years, I was the outsider. For 10 years, I was the one left out of family dinners, ignored, erased. Now, every time they accepted one of my checks, they were acknowledging the truth. They needed me. And it wasn't just about the money. It was about the humiliation of being stripped down, of having their secrets laid bare, of realizing that the very person they had discarded was now the one deciding whether they sank or swam. It wasn't loud revenge. It wasn't flashy, but it was devastating. The next few weeks played out like clockwork. They'd come to me with updates, proof of sacrifices they were making. They canceled subscriptions, sold off furniture they didn't need, even downsized some of their social obligations. But the more progress they made, the more cracks I saw in their relationship. My son was quieter, more withdrawn. His wife's resentment simmered just below the surface, bursting out in little comments she thought I didn't notice. One evening, as they were leaving, I overheard her snap at him just outside my front door. "This is humiliating. Begging your mother like this. Do you even realize how pathetic you look?" I smiled to myself as I sipped my wine, unseen behind the glass doors, because that was the beauty of revenge. I didn't have to destroy them. They were destroying themselves, piece by piece, under the weight of their own choices. All I had to do was sit back and let it happen. And yet, even as I savored their downfall, I knew I needed to tread carefully. Revenge is sweetest when it's slow, but it's most effective when it's precise. Push too hard, and they might walk away. Play too soft, and they might not feel the sting. So I kept the balance. Every check was bigger than the last, but every check came with a condition. Proof of humility, proof of sacrifice, proof that they were bowing to me, whether they liked it or not. And the more they bowed, the more their pride shattered. By the end of the second month, they were a shadow of the people who had stood on my doorstep the first day. The smugness was gone. The arrogance had faded. What was left was a fragile couple clinging to each other, their smiles forced, their voices heavy with exhaustion. And I loved every second of it. Now, before I go on, let me pause for a second. These stories take hours to craft, hours to dig through the memories, organize the details, and tell them in a way that makes sense. If you're still listening right now, I want to ask you a small favor. Please hit that subscribe button. It might seem like a simple click, but for me, it's the fuel that keeps these stories coming. Think of it as your way of saying, I see the work you're putting in, and I appreciate it. One night, about 3 months into this little arrangement, my son called me late. Later than he ever had before. His voice was low, shaky. "Mom, I don't know what to do anymore. We're fighting all the time. She blames me for everything, says I'm weak for coming to you. I don't even know who I am anymore." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered every Christmas I spent alone, every birthday where my phone never rang, every holiday where my chair sat empty. and the sympathy vanished. "Son," I said quietly, "you're learning what it feels like to be powerless, to need someone and be ignored, to beg for a place at the table and be denied. Maybe now you understand what you put me through." There was silence on the other end. And then, softly, he whispered, "You're right." And just like that, I knew I had him. Completely. There's a moment in every game of power where one side realizes they've already lost. It's not when the final blow is struck. It's much earlier, in the quiet recognition that no matter what they do, the other side is already 10 steps ahead. And I knew, after that late night call from my son, that he had reached that point. His voice that night was weak, almost unrecognizable. This was the same man who had turned his back on me for a decade, who hadn't picked up my calls or invited me to his home, now whispering like a child afraid of the dark. He had admitted it, I was right. But his wife, she wasn't broken yet. No, she still had fight in her. And fight can be dangerous when someone feels their world slipping away. The next weekend, they arrived at my house again. My son looked tired, his shoulders hunched, his suit wrinkled in ways it never used to be. His wife, though, came in like she owned the place. Chin lifted, lips pressed into a stubborn smile, her heels clicking against my marble floors like defiance itself. I watched them carefully as we sat down in the living room. My son barely looked up, but she met my gaze head-on, her eyes sharp, almost daring me. "So," I began calmly, "have you made more progress?" My son nodded. "Yes, we canceled the spa memberships. Cut back on eating out. We're trying, Mom." But before he could continue, she jumped in. "We've done everything you asked, but it's still not enough. We're drowning, and these little crumbs you keep handing out aren't saving us. We need the full amount now." Her voice was firm, clipped, laced with venom. I set my teacup down slowly, deliberately. "Crumbs," I repeated. She didn't flinch. "Yes, crumbs. You have more money than you could ever spend, and you're sitting here playing games with us. Do you enjoy this? Watching us grovel?" For a moment, the room went still. My son shifted uncomfortably, his hand twitching like he wanted to grab hers, to stop her, but he didn't. "And me?" I smiled, calmly, coldly. "Yes," I said softly. "I do enjoy it." Her mouth dropped open. My son's head jerked up, eyes wide. "Because for 10 years, I continued, my voice low and steady, you enjoyed erasing me. You enjoyed posting pictures of family gatherings I wasn't invited to. You enjoyed pretending I didn't exist. And now you don't get to rewrite history by walking into my home and demanding my money like nothing happened." My son swallowed hard, guilt written across his face. But his wife, she bristled, her eyes narrowing into slits. "This is petty," she spat. "We're family. Family." I leaned forward, my smile vanishing. Family is supposed to be there for each other. Family doesn't lock their own mother out of their lives for 10 years. Family doesn't let her spend holidays alone while they smile for pictures. Don't you dare lecture me about family. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, my son broke it, his voice trembling. "She's right, Mom. We were wrong. We hurt you. I hurt you. And I can't undo that, but I need your help. Please." And just like that, I saw it, the break. His pride was gone. His defenses crumbled. He wasn't speaking like a man anymore, but like a child, desperate and ashamed. But her, she wasn't broken yet. Not fully. And I knew if I wanted my revenge to be complete, she had to feel it too. After they left that evening, I sat in my quiet house, sipping wine by the fire. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, control. Not control over them specifically, but control over my own story. For a decade, they had ridden me out, made me powerless, made me question my worth. Now, I was the one holding the pen. But I also knew this was the most dangerous stage. People lash out when cornered, and my daughter-in-law, she was cornered, which meant it was time to tighten the screws. The following week, I sent them a message. "Before I release any more funds, I want you both to join me for dinner at the French Room. Friday night. Don't be late." The French Room was one of the most exclusive restaurants in Dallas. It wasn't just about the food. It was about prestige, appearances, reputation. The kind of place you couldn't walk into unless you had money, connections, or both. When they arrived that Friday, I was already seated at a private table near the back, the chandelier light catching the crystal glasses on the table. My son looked nervous, out of place. His wife, though, was glowing, clearly thrilled to be somewhere she could still project wealth and status, even if it was on my dime. The dinner was exquisite. Courses of foie gras, truffle risotto, perfectly seared duck. I let them eat, let them drink, let them enjoy the illusion for a while. And then, just as dessert was served, I slid a small folder across the table. "What's this?" my son asked, hesitating. "Your next condition," I said simply. Inside were papers, proof of their debts, the foreclosure notices, the credit card bills. Not just copies, originals. His wife's face drained of color. "Where did you get these?" I smiled. "I have my ways." Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. This is private." "Nothing is private when you're asking me for $75,000, I said coolly. "If you want my help, you're going to be honest with me, and with yourselves. That means no more hiding. From now on, every financial decision you make goes through me. Every dime you spend, I know about it. If you can't agree to that, then we're done." My son nodded immediately, relief flooding his face. But she slammed the folder shut, her eyes blazing. "This is insane," she hissed. "You're treating us like children." I leaned in, my voice sharp but calm. "Children at least get invited to Christmas. You erased me for 10 years. If you want my money, you'll play by my rules. Otherwise, you can walk out that door and lose everything. Your choice." Her jaw clenched. Her eyes flicked to my son, who looked at her pleadingly, begging without words. Finally, she exhaled sharply and muttered, "Fine." And just like that, another crack formed. That night, as I drove home from the restaurant, I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about punishing them. It was about reclaiming the dignity they had stolen from me. About proving that the woman they thought they could erase was stronger than they ever imagined. But I also knew something else. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. My son was broken, but she wasn't done fighting. And until she was, my revenge wouldn't be complete. Now let me pause here and ask you, if you were in my shoes, would you go this far? Would you demand full control over their finances? Or would you have just cut them off completely? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Let me know down in the comments. There's only so long someone can pretend before the mask starts to slip. My son's wife had worn hers well for years, smiling in photos, charming relatives, playing the part of the perfect daughter-in-law. But now, under the weight of debt, humiliation, and my conditions, her mask was beginning to crack. And I could see every fracture. The first real slip came during what should have been a simple dinner. I'd invited them back to the mansion for a Sunday meal. Nothing fancy. Just roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. My son was subdued, polite, careful with every word he spoke. He looked thinner than before, like the stress was eating away at him. His wife, though? She came in dressed like she was still attending a gala. Hair perfectly styled, nails freshly done, jewelry glinting in the chandelier light. But beneath the glamour, her smile was brittle. As we sat at the table, she started picking at the food, barely eating. She filled her glass again and again, the wine loosening her tongue. By the time dessert came, she couldn't hold it in anymore. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, setting her fork down with a clatter. My son froze. "What is this?" she snapped, waving her hand. "Us, sitting here like beggars, waiting for her approval, jumping through hoops for every dollar. It's humiliating." The room went quiet. My son's face turned pale, his eyes darting nervously between us. I leaned back in my chair, my gaze steady on her. "Humiliating?" I repeated softly. "Yes," she hissed, her cheeks flushed with wine and anger. "You're enjoying this, watching us squirm, making us dance for scraps while you sit in this palace. It's sick." My son tried to interject, but I raised a hand. "You're right," I said calmly. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She hadn't expected me to agree. "You're absolutely right," I continued. "It is humiliating. And do you know why? Because you made sure I felt the exact same way for 10 years. Do you have any idea what it's like to realize your entire family is together while you're sitting at home alone? Do you know how many nights I stared at pictures of reunions, weddings, birthdays, wondering why I wasn't good enough to be included? Her face tightened, but I didn't let up. You took my son from me. You made sure I was erased. And now you get to feel what it's like to be erased from your own comfort, to beg for what you used to take for granted. That's not sick. That's balance. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her lips trembled, her eyes glassy with rage she couldn't put into words. My son reached for her hand, but she pulled it away sharply, grabbing her wine glass instead. And that's when I saw it, the first real break. The next week, she didn't come with him. My son showed up at my door alone, shoulders slumped, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. She didn't want to come, he said quietly. She says you're playing mind games. I raised an eyebrow. And what do you say? He sighed. I say maybe you are, but maybe we deserve it. That answer almost caught me off guard. Almost. I let him inside, poured him a drink, and listened as he opened up in a way he never had before. He told me about the fights, the sleepless nights, the way she blamed him for their downfall. He admitted he felt trapped, torn between protecting his pride, protecting her, and surviving the mess they'd made. And then he said something I'll never forget. Mom, I think she resents me more than she resents you, because I'm the one who let this happen. I'm the one who brought us to you, and she'll never forgive me for that. His voice cracked on the last word. I saw the boy he used to be, the boy I raised, peeking out from beneath the weary man he'd become. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to pity. But pity doesn't erase 10 years of loneliness. Pity doesn't erase the silence of being unwanted. So I kept my voice firm. Son, I said quietly, you have to decide who you're loyal to. Your wife, or the mother who stood by you until you abandoned her. I'm not telling you to choose me. I'm telling you to finally make a choice. His eyes glistened, but he nodded. 2 weeks later, she came back. Not willingly, of course. My son practically dragged her in, her lips pressed tight, her eyes flashing with fury. She sat on the edge of the couch like it was a throne she didn't want to touch, arms crossed, refusing to meet my eyes. We're here, she said curtly. Now what? I ignored the venom in her voice and set a folder on the coffee table. Inside, I said evenly, is a budget I've created for you. It details exactly what you can spend, down to the dollar. Rent, groceries, utilities, transportation. No extras, no luxuries. Every cent accounted for. Her head snapped up. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious, I replied calmly. If you want another check, you'll follow this budget to the letter. And you'll send me receipts at the end of every week to prove it. Her face flushed crimson. This is control. This is manipulation. This is survival, I interrupted sharply. And if you don't like it, you're free to walk away right now and lose everything. For a moment, I thought she might. Her fists clenched, her jaw tight, her body practically vibrating with rage. But then, slowly, she exhaled and snatched the folder from the table. Fine, she spat. But don't think for a second I'll forget this. I leaned back, smiling faintly. Good. I don't want you to forget. Over the next month, the transformation was remarkable. The woman who once flaunted luxury handbags and designer shoes was now clipping coupons, shopping at Walmart, and sending me carefully organized envelopes of receipts every Friday. Every time I opened one of those envelopes, I felt the satisfaction of 10 years of pain unraveling in my favor. But with every sacrifice she made, her resentment grew sharper, uglier. She spoke less, smiled less, her laughter gone entirely. Even my son admitted the tension at home was unbearable. She looks at me like I'm the enemy, he confessed one evening, his voice heavy with despair. Like I betrayed her by letting this happen. And in a way he had, because he had finally chosen. Now, I know some people will read this and think I've gone too far. That maybe I should have just walked away, left them to their downfall instead of orchestrating it piece by piece. But let me ask you this. If someone erased you from your own family for 10 years, would you just forgive and forget? Or would you make them feel the weight of what they did? one humiliating step at a time. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments. By the end of that month, the cracks in her mask weren't cracks anymore. They were fissures, deep and jagged, threatening to tear her apart completely. And I knew it was only a matter of time before she broke in front of me. And when she did, it would be glorious. There's a kind of silence that settles in before something explodes. You can feel it in the air, thick and heavy, like the world is holding its breath. That's the silence I felt the night she finally broke. It didn't happen during one of our dinners, or even during a tense conversation. No. Her breaking point came on a quiet Tuesday evening when my son showed up at my mansion unannounced, dragging her behind him like a storm on a leash. She looked disheveled, not the polished, pristine woman I'd grown used to seeing. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged, her eyes wild with fury. "We need to talk," my son said breathlessly, his grip tight on her arm. I stepped aside to let them in, my stomach tightening with anticipation. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. The second she was inside, she tore free from his grasp and spun toward me, her face twisted with rage. "You think you've won, don't you?" she spat. I stayed calm, folding my arms. "I don't know what you're talking about." Her voice rose, sharp and trembling. "Don't play games with me. You've been pulling the strings, humiliating us, controlling us like puppets. And she jabbed a finger at my son, he just sits there and lets you do it." My son's shoulders slumped, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "Please," he whispered, "don't do this." But she was past reason. "You ruined us," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You wanted revenge, and you got it. Well, congratulations. You've broken your own son. You've destroyed our marriage. Are you happy now?" Her words cut through the room like glass shattering. I stood there, steady, unflinching. Because beneath her rage, beneath her wild accusations, I heard the truth she didn't want to admit. I wasn't the one who had destroyed them. They had destroyed themselves. All I had done was give them the mirror to see it. She began pacing the living room, her heels clicking against the marble, her hands flying as she ranted. "I see what you're doing. You think you're clever, but I'm not stupid. You're trying to make me crack, so you can sit there smug and say you were right. You're trying to make me the villain." I let her rant, sipping calmly from the glass of water I'd set on the table. My silence only enraged her further. "Say something," she shrieked. "Don't just sit there looking at me like I'm some charity case." I set the glass down slowly and met her gaze. My voice was quiet, steady, deliberate. "You don't need my help to be the villain," I said. "You've done that all by yourself." Her face flushed crimson. She opened her mouth to retort, but no words came. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her breathing ragged, her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. And then, in a move I never expected, she picked up the glass vase on my side table and hurled it at the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, shards scattering across the hardwood floor. My son jumped, his hands flying to his head. "What the hell, Emily?" She stood there, chest heaving, eyes blazing, the sound of shattering glass still ringing in the air. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I didn't see a woman in control. I didn't see the polished socialite, the perfect daughter-in-law. I saw someone broken, desperate, terrified, and it was beautiful. I didn't flinch. I didn't yell. I simply stood and walked calmly to the kitchen, grabbed a broom, and returned to sweep up the shards. As I worked, I spoke evenly, almost casually. "Do you know what's funny?" I said. 10 years ago, you shattered something too. Not a vase, not a piece of glass, something far more fragile. My trust, my place in this family, my dignity." I looked up, meeting her eyes as I swept the last of the shards into the dustpan. "But here's the difference. When you broke me, I picked myself up, piece by piece, and built something stronger. What are you going to do now that you're the one in pieces?" Her lips trembled, her face pale. She said nothing. My son reached out to her again, his voice shaking. "Emily, please. Just stop." But she pulled away from him, tears forming in her eyes. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered hoarsely. "I can't live like this." And just like that, she collapsed onto the couch, her hands covering her face, her sobs muffled but raw. For the first time in a long time, I saw her without the mask. Not the woman who had orchestrated my exclusion, not the woman who had sneered at my crumbs, but a woman stripped bare by the weight of her own choices. And I'll admit, part of me almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the empty holidays, the lonely birthdays, the 10 years of silence, and the pity dissolved. You'll get through this, I said coolly, but only if you're willing to face the consequences of what you've done. Otherwise, you'll keep shattering everything around you until there's nothing left. She didn't respond. She couldn't. That night, they left my house in silence. My son guided her gently to the car, her eyes red and swollen, her body slumped in defeat. As I watched them drive away, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and finality. She had broken. The woman who once thought she could erase me from my own family had finally crumbled under the weight of her own pride. But I also knew something else. Broken things have sharp edges, and when people are cornered, they don't always accept defeat quietly. No, I had a feeling this wasn't the end of her fight. This was just the beginning of her desperation. When people are cornered, they only have two options: surrender or lash out. And I knew Emily well enough to know she wasn't the type to surrender. Her breakdown in my living room should have been the end. A clean crack, a final breaking point where she finally saw the futility of her fight. But instead, it was just the beginning of something darker. Because desperation doesn't bring peace. Desperation breeds chaos. It started small, subtle. My son began missing his regular visits. At first, it was just once. He texted to say he was too busy with work. Then it became twice, then 3 times. Soon, an entire month went by with only silence on his end. I knew exactly what was happening. She was pulling the strings again. Then came the whispers. A distant cousin called me one afternoon, her voice hesitant. "I don't know if you've heard," she said, "but Emily's been telling people you're unstable, that you're using your money to control them, to make them suffer. She said you threw a vase at her during a fight." I laughed bitterly. "She's lying. She's the one who shattered the vase." "I know," my cousin said gently, "but not everyone does. She's convincing." And there it was, her desperation move. If she couldn't beat me in my home, on my terms, she'd take the battle outside. She'd spin her own story, paint herself the victim, and me the villain. But here's the thing about lies, they don't stand long against the truth. And I had more truth than she could ever bury. 2 weeks later, my son finally showed up again. Alone. He looked older somehow, worn down, the weight of his marriage dragging him under. His eyes darted nervously around the room, as if he expected Emily to materialize out of thin air and stop him from speaking. "Mom," he said quietly, "I don't know what to do." I sat him down, poured him a drink, and waited. She's telling people things," he admitted, his voice low. "Things about you. About how you're manipulating us. And people are starting to believe her." I raised an eyebrow. "Do you believe her?" He shook his head immediately. "No, I know the truth. I know what really happened. But she's my wife. I can't just abandon her." And there it was, the tug of war that had defined our relationship for over a decade. Me on one side, Emily on the other, and him stuck in the middle, too weak to choose. I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Son, listen to me. You've spent 10 years letting her make the decisions. 10 years letting her erase me, control the narrative, dictate your life. And where has it gotten you? Broke, exhausted, miserable. At what point do you stop letting her pull you down with her?" His eyes glistened, his lips trembling. "I don't know." I placed my hand gently over his. "You do know. You just don't want to admit it." The following weekend, I got my answer. It was late Saturday night when I heard the pounding on my front door. When I opened it, Emily stood there, her face twisted in rage, her body practically vibrating with fury. "You," she snarled, stepping inside without invitation. "You think you can take him from me? You think you can turn him against me?" I didn't move, didn't flinch. "I don't have to turn him against you, Emily. You're doing that all by yourself." She laughed bitterly, a harsh, broken sound. "You think you're so clever, sitting up here in your mansion, pulling strings like some queen on her throne. But you're pathetic. You're a lonely old woman who had to buy her own son back." Her words stung, I'll admit. But instead of anger, I felt something else. Clarity. You're right about one thing, I said softly. I was lonely. For 10 years, I sat in silence because you made sure I wasn't wanted. But here's the difference between us. Emily, I survived my loneliness. You can't even survive your pride. Her face twisted, and before I could react, she shoved me. The force wasn't enough to knock me down, but it was enough to ignite something inside me. A fire that had been waiting for this moment. You just made a mistake, I said coldly. My son arrived minutes later, out of breath, panic in his eyes. He must have followed her, knowing what she was planning. What happened? He cried, rushing to me. I looked at him steadily, then at Emily, who stood trembling, her chest heaving with rage. Your wife put her hands on me, I said calmly. His face drained of color. Emily, tell me that's not true. She froze, her eyes darting between us, her mouth opening and closing without words. She provoked me, she finally sputtered. She's been provoking me this whole time. But it was too late. The look on my son's face told me everything I needed to know. For the first time, he saw her clearly. Not as the polished woman who had charmed him all those years ago, but as the manipulative, desperate person she had become. Get out, he said quietly. She blinked, stunned. What? Get out, he repeated, his voice firm. Go wait in the car. Now. Her face crumpled, fury and disbelief mingling in her eyes, but she obeyed. For the first time, she obeyed. When she was gone, my son sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Mom, I don't know how much longer I can do this. I placed a hand on his shoulder, my voice gentle but firm. Then don't. You've carried her weight long enough. It's time to put it down. He looked up at me, tears brimming in his eyes. And in that moment, I knew the tide had turned. That night, after they left, I stood at my window watching the taillights fade into the darkness. My heart was steady, my mind clear. Emily had made her move. Her desperate attempt to take back control had only pushed him further away. And now the choice was his. Would he finally free himself from her grip, or would he let her drag him down one last time? Either way, the end was coming. I could feel it. There's a moment in every storm when the wind dies down, when the thunder pauses and you realize the worst has either passed or it's about to strike again. That's where we were. After weeks of tension, after Emily's desperate lashing out, silence had fallen. But silence doesn't mean peace. Silence means waiting. And I knew my son was standing on a razor's edge, one step away from freedom or destruction. The days after Emily shoved me, things were strangely quiet. No calls, no visits, no texts, just stillness. At first, I thought maybe he'd gone back to her, that the guilt of standing up to his wife had pulled him right back into her orbit. I'd seen it before. Men who mistake control for love, who confuse manipulation with loyalty. But then one Saturday morning, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, my son stood there alone. No wife, no storm, just him. Can I come in? He asked softly. We sat at the kitchen table, the morning light pouring in through the windows. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. His hands shook slightly as he wrapped them around his coffee mug. She's gone, he said finally. I raised an eyebrow. Gone. She packed a bag and left last night. Said she couldn't do this anymore. Said I'd betrayed her by choosing you over her. His voice cracked on the last word. And did you? I asked quietly. He looked at me, eyes raw, desperate. I don't know, Mom. Did I? I leaned forward, my voice calm but sharp. You didn't betray her. You betrayed yourself when you let her erase me from your life. You betrayed yourself when you let her dictate every choice, every relationship, every part of you. What you did last night wasn't betrayal. It was survival. His lip trembled, his eyes glistening. And for the first time in years, I saw him not as the man who had abandoned me, but as the boy I raised, the boy who used to run to me when he was scared, who used to believe I could fix anything. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he spoke. Mom, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know how to fix this. She's telling people things about you, about us. She's trying to ruin your name. And part of me still feels guilty. Like I failed her. I reached across the table and took his hand. You didn't fail her, I said firmly. She failed you. She failed us. And if people believe her lies, let them. You and I know the truth. That's all that matters. His shoulders slumped, relief and sorrow washing over him all at once. That night, he stayed at my house. He didn't say much after dinner, just sat quietly by the fire, staring into the flames. It was like he was trying to burn away the memories, the pain, the years of silence that had brought us here. When he finally went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, thinking. For 10 years, I had dreamed of this moment. Not the pain, not the drama, but the simple act of having my son back under my roof, talking to me, looking at me without resentment in his eyes. And yet, as much as I wanted to savor it, I knew it wasn't over. Emily wasn't done. She wouldn't walk away quietly. She would fight to keep her narrative alive, even if it meant destroying what was left of him in the process. But now, for the first time, I wasn't afraid. Because he had made his choice. The following week, the rumors spread faster. Friends of friends called. Old relatives sent me awkward messages. People whispered behind closed doors. Emily was working overtime to paint herself the victim, the poor abandoned wife crushed by her cruel mother-in-law. But the difference this time was simple. I didn't care. Because now, when people whispered, my son was there beside me. When questions came, he answered them honestly. When relatives doubted me, he told them the truth. For the first time in years, he was standing on my side. And Emily hated it. I could see it in the way her lies grew more dramatic, more desperate. First, it was that I was controlling. Then, it was that I was abusive. Then, it was that I was threatening her. The more she spoke, the less believable she became. And the more she screamed, the more people started to question her instead of me. Because that's the thing about lies, they collapse under their own weight. One night, as my son and I sat on the patio, he turned to me and asked, "Do you think she'll come back?" I thought about it carefully before answering. "She'll try," I said. "But the question isn't whether she comes back. The question is whether you'll let her." He stared into the night, silent for a long time. Then he shook his head. "No," he said finally. "Not this time." And with those words, I knew the storm had passed. Now, before I go on, let me pause here. These stories don't just spill out overnight. They take hours of writing, revisiting old wounds, piecing together the details, and telling them in a way that makes sense. If you've stayed with me this far, I want to ask you for a small favor. Hit that subscribe button. It's free for you, but for me, it's a way of knowing the work is valued. Think of it as your way of saying, I see you and I'm listening. In the weeks that followed, Emily tried her hardest to claw her way back into control. She sent messages, left voicemails, even showed up at his office in a last-ditch attempt to win him back. But the cracks were too deep. The mask was gone. And every time she tried, he only saw more clearly what she really was. Finally, one afternoon, he came to me with a stack of papers in his hands. Divorce papers. "I never thought I'd do this," he admitted, his voice heavy, "but I can't live like that anymore. I want my life back, Mom. I want my family back." I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness for the years lost, relief for the chains broken, and a quiet triumph that after everything, justice had found its way. "You'll get your life back," I said softly. "One step at a time." He nodded, his shoulders lighter than I'd seen in years. That night, as I stood by the window looking out over the city lights, I thought about everything that had happened. The years of silence, the betrayal, the loneliness, the revenge, slow and deliberate, the cracks, the shattering, the desperate fight. And now, finally, the choice. He had chosen me, not because of money, not because of manipulation, but because at the end of the day, blood is thicker than the lies people wrap around it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't in years, peace. Now, let me ask you this. If you were in my shoes, would you have taken him back after everything? Or would you have cut him out just like he did to me? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Let me know down in the comments. There's a saying that stuck with me my whole life. A cornered animal is the most dangerous. It doesn't matter how small or how weak it looks. If it feels trapped, it will bare its teeth and bite with everything it has left. Emily had been cornered. She'd lost her grip on my son. She'd lost her control over the family. She'd even lost her polished mask. And when people like her have nothing left, they don't surrender. They scorched the earth. It began with the divorce papers. My son had finally found his courage, finally taken that step toward freedom. He'd gone to her, papers in hand, determined to end it cleanly, quietly, with as little pain as possible. But Emily? She didn't believe in quiet. The moment she saw those papers, she exploded. Screaming, sobbing, begging, cursing. She cycled through emotions like a storm tearing through a town. But beneath it all, there was one constant: rage. "You think you can just leave me," she shrieked. "After everything I've given you? After everything I sacrificed? You think you can walk away and run back to her?" Her. Always me. In her mind, I was the shadow looming over their marriage, the reason for every crack, every failure. She couldn't see that she had built her entire life on manipulation and control. And when those pillars crumbled, there was nothing left to hold it up. But she wasn't about to go down quietly. 2 days later, the first blow landed. My son got a call from his job in Chicago. Someone had sent them a long, detailed email accusing him of financial misconduct, claiming he had stolen money from clients, that he was using company resources to fund my lavish lifestyle. The email was anonymous, of course, but we both knew who had written it. The company launched an internal investigation. He wasn't suspended, but the scrutiny was enough to shake him. "She's trying to destroy me," he admitted, pacing in my living room, his hands pulling at his hair. "She wants to take everything before I can leave her." I placed a steady hand on his arm. "Then don't let her. You've already started to take your life back. Don't give her the satisfaction of watching you fall apart now." But deep down, I knew Emily wasn't done. That was just her opening strike. The next came swiftly. She filed motions in court demanding alimony, claiming she had supported him all these years while he chased his mother's approval. She painted herself as the long-suffering wife, abandoned by a man brainwashed by his manipulative mother. And then she did the unthinkable. She dragged me into it. She filed statements claiming I had bribed him to leave her, that I had offered him financial rewards, that I had promised him his inheritance early if he divorced her. She called me a narcissist, a master manipulator, the root of all their problems. When I read the papers, my hands shook with fury. For 10 years, she had erased me. For months, she had smeared me. But now she was dragging my name into a courtroom, trying to bury me under lies. I looked at my son and said, "This is it. This is her last strike." The weeks that followed were some of the hardest I'd faced. Lawyers, court hearings, endless paperwork. Emily showed up to every hearing dressed to perfection, her face painted in grief, her voice trembling just enough to make the story believable. She cried on cue, spun elaborate lies about her sacrifices, her suffering, her fear of me. She painted herself as a woman trapped between a domineering mother-in-law and a weak husband. For a moment, I could see the judge falter, could see the way her performance tugged at the edges of sympathy. But then, something remarkable happened. My son spoke, not in anger, not in desperation, but in calm, steady truth. He laid out everything: 10 years of exclusion, the manipulation, the lies, the smear campaigns. He admitted his own weakness, his complicity in letting it go on for so long. He told the judge about the vase, about the shove, about the lies she had spread through the family. And then he said something that broke me and healed me all at once. "My mother isn't perfect," he admitted, his voice cracking. "But she never gave up on me, even when I gave up on her. And if I have to choose between a woman who tears me down and a mother who builds me back up, I choose my mother." Emily's face crumbled. For once, her performance slipped. And in that moment, the judge saw the truth. The ruling wasn't perfect. Divorces never are. Emily got a small settlement, some spousal support for a limited time. But the important thing? She didn't get what she wanted. She didn't get to destroy him. She didn't get to destroy me. And as she walked out of that courtroom, her heels clicking against the tile, her eyes locked on mine with pure venom, I knew she hated me more than ever. But I also knew she was finished. Because this wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of her reign. That night, my son and I sat outside on the patio, watching the sun sink over the horizon. The air was still, the storm finally gone. He looked at me, his voice quiet. It's over. I nodded, sipping my tea. Yes, but endings are just beginnings in disguise. He frowned. Beginnings of what? I smiled faintly. Of us. Of our family. Of the life you almost lost, but now get to build again. He leaned back, exhaling deeply, as though he was finally breathing for the first time in years. And for me it was the sweetest revenge of all. Not destroying her, not even exposing her, but simply surviving her. Because survival is its own kind of victory. When you spend years in the middle of a storm, you almost forget what calm feels like. The quiet becomes unsettling, the peace feels foreign. That's how it was after the dust settled. Emily was gone. The divorce finalized. The whispers had faded. For the first time in over a decade, there was no drama lurking around the corner. No knives hidden behind fake smiles, no empty chairs at holiday tables, because I wasn't invited. It was just life. Simple. Still. And I had to relearn how to live it. The first holiday after the divorce was Thanksgiving. I'll never forget it. My house in Lake Forest was full for the first time in years. Cousins, nieces, nephews, my siblings. And most importantly, my son, sitting at the table beside me, not across from me in judgment or absent entirely. We cooked together that morning. For the first time in years, we laughed in the kitchen like we used to when he was little. Back when he'd sit on the counter licking cake batter from the spoon while I shooed him off. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward pauses, moments when guilt hung heavy in the air. But it was real. And real, after 10 years of silence, was more than enough. As we sat down to eat, I looked at the table. My seat wasn't empty this year. My place was exactly where it should have been all along. And I realized something. Revenge hadn't given me peace. Money hadn't given me peace. Even watching Emily's lies collapse hadn't given me peace. What gave me peace was this. Being seen again, being loved again, being chosen again by the son I thought I'd lost forever. In the months that followed, I started to heal. Slowly, steadily. The scars of those years didn't fade overnight, but they did stop hurting. My business continued to thrive, but I wasn't pouring myself into it the way I used to. I didn't need to fill the void anymore. I didn't need to bury my loneliness under work or wealth. Instead, I started to live. Trips to New York. Weekends in Napa Valley. Walks by Lake Michigan in the early mornings when the sun hit the water just right. Life became more than survival. It became beautiful again. And every time I felt that old ache creeping back, the memory of the birthdays missed, the years wasted, I reminded myself, those years may be gone, but the years ahead are mine. Emily tried once or twice more to stir trouble. She sent a few bitter emails, made a few bitter phone calls. But without my son backing her, her words carried no weight. Eventually, she faded into silence. And in that silence, I found freedom. One evening, about a year after the divorce, my son and I sat outside watching the sunset. He was quieter these days, more thoughtful, as though he was still piecing himself back together. "Mom," he said finally, "do you ever regret it?" I glanced at him. Regret what? Letting it go on for so long. All those years you tried to reach out, even when she kept pushing you away. Do you ever regret not cutting me off completely? I thought about it for a long time. About the pain, the loneliness, the tears I cried in silence. About the mansion I built not out of joy, but out of a need to prove I could survive without them. Then I shook my head. "No," I said softly, "because if I had cut you off, if I had stopped trying, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. And this moment, it's worth every year I spent waiting for it." He didn't answer right away, just nodded slowly, his eyes glassy with unspoken words. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something else. Revenge hadn't been the end of my story. It had been the bridge, the tool that carried me from betrayal to survival, from survival to peace. But in the end, revenge wasn't what mattered. What mattered was growth. What mattered was choosing myself, even when no one else did. What mattered was never letting the fire inside me die, even when the people closest to me tried to smother it. And maybe, just maybe, that fire was the reason I was still here. Whole, standing tall, unbroken. The last time I ever heard Emily's name was months later, in passing from a cousin. Apparently, she'd moved out of state, started over, a smaller life, quieter, far from the family she once tried to control. I didn't feel joy when I heard it. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt nothing. And that's when I knew I had finally won. Because true revenge isn't about destruction. It's about indifference. It's about reaching a point where the person who once consumed your every thought no longer holds any power over you. Emily had been my storm for 10 years, but now she was just a shadow in the past. One evening, as the seasons shifted and autumn painted the trees gold and crimson, I stood on my balcony, a glass of wine in hand, watching the leaves fall. I thought about everything: the silence, the pain, the survival, the revenge. And then I thought about the table at Thanksgiving, the laughter in the kitchen, the simple sound of my son calling me mom without bitterness in his voice. And I realized that was my ending. Not the mansion, not the wealth, not even the shattered vase. My ending was that chair at the table, no longer empty. And with that, I finally felt peace. Before I close this story, let me say something personal. Writing this, reliving these memories, has taken hours upon hours. Not just writing, but remembering, shaping, pulling pieces of myself into words so you could feel what I felt. If you've made it this far, do me one last favor: subscribe. It's the easiest way to say your story mattered. And one last question for you. Have you ever reached a point where indifference felt like victory? Where the moment you stopped caring was the moment you truly won? Share it with me in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories.